People who don't have friends are often misunderstood. They're labeled as distant, cold, or difficult. But when you strip away the assumptions and look closer through a psychological lens, something else becomes clear. The absence of friendship doesn't always point to social failure. Sometimes it reveals depth, restraint, and traits that society quietly undervalues. These are not the broken ones. They are the observers, and if you listen carefully, their solitude tells a different story. The first trait is self-sufficiency. Psychologists describe this as an internal locus of control. The belief that one's own actions, not external forces, determine outcomes. People who spend much of their time alone often develop a strong sense of independence. They're comfortable relying on their own judgment, their own rhythm, their own emotional resources. Where most seek validation from others, the self-sufficient person finds grounding in autonomy. They don't need constant reassurance. They don't chase approval. And because of that, they can navigate life with clarity. It's not arrogance, it's an economy of attention. Energy directed inward rather than scattered outward. The second trait is heightened self-awareness. Solitude amplifies introspection. Without constant social noise, the mind turns inward and begins to study itself. These individuals notice micro-thoughts, subtle emotional shifts, cognitive biases. They often journal, reflect, analyze. From a Jungian perspective, they live close to the shadow, aware of their contradictions instead of hiding from them. This awareness can make socializing feel exhausting because they see through posturing quickly. But it also makes them emotionally intelligent in ways that group-oriented people rarely achieve. The third trait is integrity. Those with few or no friends are less likely to bend themselves to fit the crowd. They resist conformity pressures described by Solomon Asch's classic studies in social psychology. Because they're not embedded in a constant feedback loop, they have fewer incentives to lie, perform, or adjust their values for approval. They prefer authenticity, even when it isolates them. They'd rather be alone with truth than surrounded by false agreement. That kind of integrity is often mistaken for aloofness, but in reality, it's moral endurance. The fourth trait is deep focus. Without constant social interruption, attention sharpens. Psychologists studying flow, that immersive state of creative concentration, note how easily solitary individuals slip into it. They read longer, think slower, pursue mastery rather than novelty. Their dopamine cycles aren't trained by social media or gossip. They experience satisfaction from progress itself, not from applause. This focus becomes a hidden superpower in a distracted world. The fifth trait is empathic precision. Paradoxically, people who are alone a lot often understand others better than those surrounded by friends. Because they observe rather than participate, their perception becomes forensic. They notice tone shifts, micro-expressions, unspoken hierarchies. It's the empathy of a watchful scientist, detached but accurate. They don't waste empathy. They allocate it where it matters. And when they finally connect with someone genuine, that empathy feels surgical, exact, and profoundly healing. The sixth trait is selective trust. These individuals don't let others in easily, not because they dislike people, but because they understand risk. Trust, psychologically speaking, is a calculation, a balance between vulnerability and safety. They've likely experienced betrayal or disillusionment that forced their standards upward. So, they protect themselves with discernment. They prefer one authentic bond over 100 surface ones. It's not misanthropy, it's quality control. The seventh trait is high openness to ideas, but low openness to people, a paradox documented in personality research. They absorb philosophy, art, science, culture, but they filter human interaction. Their curiosity is intellectual, not social. They seek stimulation from concepts rather than chatter. This makes them visionary thinkers, innovators, writers, and analysts, but also lonely by design. Society rewards sociability more than originality. Yet history shows most breakthroughs came from isolation. The eighth trait is emotional regulation. Without constant social reinforcement, these individuals learn to soothe themselves. They develop strong prefrontal control over impulsive reactions. They don't erupt in anger or chase drama. They metabolize emotion privately through reasoning or creative expression. Clinical studies on solitude show that those who manage isolation will often score higher on measures of emotional stability and conscientiousness. They feel deeply, but process slowly, like deep water that barely ripples at the surface. The ninth trait is purpose orientation. When social life isn't central, meaning shifts toward personal mission. They organize their identity around goals, values, and inner coherence instead of belonging. This aligns with Viktor Frankl's concept of logotherapy, purpose as the axis of psychological survival. They may appear detached, but in truth, they're anchored. Every hour alone becomes invested in building something invisible: understanding, craft, discipline, legacy. Friendship is replaced by devotion to an idea larger than self. And the 10th trait, the most misunderstood, is emotional depth. People without many friends often feel too intensely for casual connection. Their empathy isn't loud, it's subterranean. They perceive subtext others ignore. They grieve for things long past, feel nostalgia for moments that never happened. Because of this, small talk feels unbearable. It trivializes the scale of what they feel. So they retreat, not from people, but from shallowness. Their solitude isn't a wound. It's a containment field for intensity. At this point, it's easy to wonder, if these traits are so strong, why does isolation still hurt? Because the human nervous system is social by design. Even those who prefer solitude need resonance, someone who sees without judgment. But connection built on pretense feels worse than none at all. That's the paradox. Psychological strength and emotional hunger coexist. The mind craves autonomy while the body remembers tribal safety. And somewhere between those two drives lives the person who walks alone, not by failure, but by choice that life misunderstood. From an evolutionary standpoint, solitary individuals exist in every species. They serve adaptive functions. Scouts, analysts, observers on the edge of the group who notice threats before anyone else. Human culture often frames this archetype as outsider, introvert, or genius. In Jungian terms, they represent the hermit archetype, the carrier of hidden light. Society moves because someone, somewhere, stayed still long enough to see clearly. Each of these 10 traits, self-sufficiency, self-awareness, integrity, focus, empathic precision, selective trust, idea openness, emotional regulation, purpose orientation, and depth, forms a pattern. It's not loneliness. It's a high-resolution form of consciousness. It's what happens when attention turns inward long enough to become wisdom. Still, the psychology of solitude has an edge. If internal balance breaks, these same traits can invert. Self-sufficiency becomes avoidance. Integrity turns into rigidity. Focus mutates into obsession. Depth collapses into despair. That's why the work isn't to escape aloneness, but to integrate it, to learn when to step outside and when to return within. Therapists studying chronic isolation emphasize one thing: connection isn't the opposite of solitude. It's its expression, turned outward. Those who understand themselves most deeply are often the ones capable of the most profound connection, once they find equals, because they don't seek company for distraction, but for resonance. When they meet someone whose frequency matches their inner silence, friendship becomes something sacred, not a social contract, but an existential mirror. In psychological practice, such people often feel invisible until that mirror appears. They aren't broken. They're simply tuned to a rarer bandwidth of humanity. Their quietness is not emptiness, it's calibration. They withdraw not from life, but from noise. They are the watchers, the pattern finders, the keepers of stillness in a restless age. And that's the real message hidden beneath this topic. When someone has few friends, don't rush to label them as lonely or damaged. Sometimes solitude is the ecosystem required for authenticity to grow. It refines, concentrates, distills. It produces minds that can withstand silence, and therefore see truth without panic. They might not belong to every group, but they belong profoundly to themselves. So the next time you meet someone who walks alone, remember, you're not looking at a social defect. You're looking at psychological precision, a consciousness fine-tuned by time, introspection, and restraint. Someone who knows that belonging is only meaningful when it's honest, and that being alone is not the absence of connection, but the presence of clarity.